Hi, I'm Kristen Hodgden, an IVF mom, proud fertility advocate, and co-founder of Rescripted. Welcome to Dear Infertility, the first ever podcast that doubles as an advice column for fertility, infertility, and pregnancy loss. This season, we're going back to our roots, highlighting personal fertility stories from those who have been there through IVF, egg freezing, donor conception, surrogacy, and more. Now let's dive in and work towards ending the stigma around fertility, infertility, and pregnancy loss.
Hi, I'm Dr. Mackenzie Purdy, reproductive endocrinologist at Kindbody. Did you know that endometriosis affects about 10% of reproductive aged women? This condition may make it harder to become pregnant. Visit kindbody.com/rescripted to learn more.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Dear Infertility. I'm your host, Kristen, and I'm here with Sarah Herron. Hi, Sarah.
Hi. So good to finally chat with you and meet you in person.
I know.
Virtually.
We're Instagram friends, but yes, so happy to have you here. For those of you who don't know Sarah, she's internationally recognized as Sarah from The Bachelor, but to us, Sarah Herron is better known for her adventurous and vulnerable Instagram posts. Born and raised in Colorado, today she is a self-proclaimed outdoor enthusiast and storyteller and is currently expecting her first child with her fiance, Dylan. Congratulations.
Thank you. I know so many feelings around it.
Oh, I'm sure. I've been there. So how are you feeling?
Oh my gosh. Kind of depends on the hour, if I'm being honest, but I feel really good right now. I feel great today. I'm also recovering from a broken leg or my knee. I broke my knee a couple months ago. Actually, like the same day I found out I was pregnant. So it's been serious roller coaster for the last 2 months.
I'm sure. Well, I mean, that'll be a good story to tell your future baby.
I know. I'll be like, we were so excited about you. Mommy went out and broke her leg over it.
Oh my gosh. So before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to kind of go back and just, can you tell us in your sort of own words, like your brief overview of your path to getting to this point?
Yeah, sure. And I'm sure like every woman, it's not so brief, right? But I will
totally
try to summarize it. Essentially, my now fiance, he was just my boyfriend at the time, Dylan. We decided, we'd been together for about 4 years and we knew we wanted to spend our lives together and wanted to start trying for a family. So we tried giving it a go for about 7 months with no luck. I mean, nothing. Like I was ovulating perfectly, but it just wasn't working out. So I went in, got my fertility tested. Turned out I had diminished ovarian reserve. And it was suggested to me that I immediately start IVF. IUI wasn't even really an option. My gynecologist was just like, you should just go straight to IVF. So it was really hard to receive that news so fast. It just kind of like hits you like a ton of bricks. And I got a referral to a few different doctors, scheduled my consultations. And before I knew it, I was starting IVF medication. I've now been through 3 egg retrievals and 2 transfers. During the process, Dylan and I found out we're both carriers of cystic fibrosis.
Wow.
So that threw an added wrench into the genetic testing of our embryos. And I've had my first transfer resulted in a chemical pregnancy, and my second transfer was successful. So that's where we are. I hope that was brief enough.
No, it didn't have to be super brief, but because sometimes it's not, and that's how it goes.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry for your loss. I feel like I've had a chemical pregnancy, and I hate that term even because it's like you're pregnant and then you weren't, and that really sucks. So how was going through 3 rounds of IVF? I mean, and finding out about the cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
Was it through the genetic carrier screening that you found that out?
Yeah. So we decided to do the genetic carrier screening like 2 days before waiting for while our eggs were fertilizing, we were waiting on the results still.
Oh, wow.
So we didn't even know when I went in for the egg retrieval that we were both carriers of this. And then Dr. Amy Avazadeh, my fertility doctor, she suggested we should do the genetic carrier screening while we were waiting for the egg retrieval results. And that's when we found out we both had cystic fibrosis. And it was like, came out of nowhere. We had no idea.
Wow.
I don't have any family members who've ever been affected by it. Dylan has one cousin who's been affected by it, but it certainly never crossed his mind. I don't think he was really thinking of that. And I never knew his cousin, so it never occurred to me either. And so
thank God for Dr. Amy, right?
I know. She was.
I just met her this week. Actually, we were at ASRM, the big fertility conference out in Anaheim, and I was like, I feel like you're a celebrity, and I'm so excited to meet you.
I know, isn't she amazing?
She is.
She's just the coolest lady ever. I love her, and she's been so kind and generous, and like has invited me into her house when I've been out in California by myself. She just makes me feel like family. So yeah, we found out about the cystic fibrosis, and that has just affected the number of chromosomally normal embryos that we had. So what would have been like, I think originally 7 or 8 chromosomally normal embryos, 4 or 5 of them were affected by the cystic fibrosis. And so that was just like a pretty big hit, like we weren't expecting that.
How did that feel, like just knowing that you had do you feel like it was sort of a silver lining to IVF, the fact that you were able to find all of that out? And
yeah, like we kind of felt like the universe maybe brought us to Dr. Amy because we needed to find out about the cystic fibrosis. Like clearly we had no idea. And you can't help but kind of, the mind is a meaning making machine. And so you can't help but wonder if like, oh my gosh, well, maybe that's why we couldn't get pregnant all along. You just don't know. And so it was like a added punch to the gut. But, we were grateful to be in the position that we were. And Dr. Amy was very committed to like, well, don't worry, like we'll get you the number of embryos that you'll need for the size of the family you want. So we kind of just embraced early on that it was going to take probably multiple egg retrievals and multiple attempts.
Yeah. And then how many healthy embryos did you have before you decided to move on to a transfer?
We did our first transfer when we actually had 6 embryos banked. Okay. And so we were like, let's move forward with one transfer. And at the time, Dr. Amy thought that potentially I had endometriosis, but of course we couldn't confirm it. I had done the Receptiva test and had a positive score on it. So we had some like signs and symptoms of endometriosis, but couldn't confirm it. And so when the first transfer was unsuccessful, Dr. Amy said, I really want to revisit the conversation of endometriosis because I think that could have played a role in the implantation trouble. So we decided, let's move forward with as many more egg retrievals as it takes to like secure our bank, fill our bank, and then we'll treat the endometriosis. So I immediately did 2 back-to-back egg retrievals, which were brutal. Like, I know when you're experiencing infertility and you're going through IVF treatments, you want to just kind of like power through it. And you're like, let's just keep going. Let's just keep going. But 2 back-to-back retrievals was really, really hard on my body. And I wasn't expecting it to be as hard as it was.
Did you have to travel to California every time?
Yes. So I go out to see Dr. Amy for every retrieval, transfer, biopsy. It's been a lot, a lot of travel, but I just feel like I'm in the best hands. And so it's worth it. Yeah. But yeah, it's been a year. Yeah.
It's such a catch-22 because fertility feels very time sensitive. You want to power through, but sometimes, and then sometimes even if you're like physically okay, mentally you're struggling or vice versa. So
totally.
It's definitely a roller coaster for sure.
Yeah. And even after those 2 egg retrievals, like you said, I was very like, okay, let's move forward with the transfer. Like we got them, time is sensitive, but I was kind of forced to just pause because I had to wait for that endometriosis surgery. Then I had to wait to heal from the surgery. So it was like I was put on a mandatory 7-month wait. And honestly, at the end of that time period, I felt so good. I felt like I was me again. I felt like I had my body back. And it's just like, if I could offer anyone an advice now, I'm like, take the time to recharge in between cycles, because you may not realize it in the moment. But like when I finally had time to step away from IVF, I just felt like such a better person. I felt like me again.
The fog lifts, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where I'm at right now. I spent a year trying for a third baby, did 4 transfers, 2 miscarriages, 2 failed implantations. And then I was like, you know what? I just need a break. And I'm like, you're sort of on autopilot. And then when you come out of it, you're like, oh, this is actually who I am. Like, it's so all consuming that your brain just doesn't have room for anything else. And then you go on a break and it's like, you have hobbies again, or.
Exactly. And I also feel like it's very easy for you to start to feel like the IVF becomes your identity in a little sense of it, because it's like you are so consumed by it that then when you take a break, you're like, oh, I'm not doing anything IVF right now. Like, who am I? What do I do with my time again? And it's just like the things we do for our fertility, but it's very consuming.
It is. What was the hardest part through all of that?
I think,
was it physically? Was it emotionally?
Yeah, I felt like the first, I was going to say, I feel like the first transfer, it was more emotional, and then the next, but really, I think I struggled with the body changes the most. Like, bad news is so disappointing, but I feel grateful I have an amazing partner and support system, and I'm in therapy, and I felt like well prepared to get through hard times. But like, the body changes are real. and especially as someone who's recovered from disordered eating, like when you start to see your body change again, like those voices get really loud and it's really uncomfortable to sit in that. So I would say that was the hardest, especially with my first transfer. Like, I questioned for a while, like, I don't even know if I can be pregnant. Like, the ED voices were just so loud that I was like, I don't know if I can do this.
And does Dr. Amy, did she have any theories as to why the first transfer didn't work after the endo surgery?
So the first transfer was before endometriosis surgery.
Oh, okay. So then the first transfer worked after the surgery?
Yes, correct.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
So first transfer did not work. Then I had endo surgery.
Okay.
Yep. And then I did a second transfer and it was successful. And also with the second transfer, we implemented Lovenox, which we didn't do the first transfer. So I think that probably played a role. Who knows? I could probably theorize for days, but.
Well, and I should ask, so did they find anything during the surgery?
So they found stage 1 endo on my ovaries, which was like, you kind of, in a way, go into the surgery hoping, like, I hope they find stage 4 and that's going to explain why I've had infertility. And like, you just hope you're going to get answers. Not that I would ever wish stage 4 endometriosis on anyone, but you hope that it's going to give you some sort of validation. And so when I woke up and they said, we found stage 1, you're kind of like, well, I'm glad, because that's validating. And to hear that it was on my ovaries is validating, because that could have been impacting egg quality. But you're like, well, that doesn't really explain anything in my uterus. So it kind of like didn't really answer the questions, but it gave me a little bit of clarity. And truly, I won't know. I haven't had like my AMH retested since the surgery. I would be very curious to test that. But, I hope it had something to do with it, but I don't want to say, like, I just hate to send people off on this path that's like, like, surgery is intensive, and if it can be avoided, I would recommend it. But if it truly can, like, course correct your infertility, then it's worth it. But surgery is very invasive. So yeah,
endometriosis is tricky in general because it's technically the only way to officially diagnose it is through surgery. But I mean, there are some things that can be done, like Lupron, I know, can help like suppress your system if you have endometriosis before a transfer. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. What was the reasoning for Dr. Amy kind of setting you off on that path? Why did she suspect that you had it?
Well, because we did the Receptiva DX test as just like precaution. Like, Dr. Amy likes to test you for everything. Like, let's just throw all the paint on the wall and see what sticks. And so
I like that because so much of fertility is reactive versus proactive. And a lot of times it's like after 3 failed transfers, then you finally start getting testing. And, if you could just know, I know not everyone has access to care, and that's a whole other issue and insurance coverage. But if you can do it, why not get answers kind of sooner rather than later?
Yeah. That's kind of how we felt too, is we were like, we'd rather just front load everything if we could, rather than, because if you go through multiple failed transfers, like that adds up too financially. Yeah. And so because of that, and then also I have a retroverted uterus. And so I've always experienced pain during intercourse. But other than that, like I didn't really have any endo symptoms. I have a heavy first day flow, and that's about it. So it was kind of like you tested positive BCL6, but like there aren't enough symptoms. So it was kind of just a gray area. Yeah. But it was enough that then after the first transfer didn't work, that we were like, okay, let's try. And at this point, I actually had already reached my insurance deductible. So like I basically had the endo surgery for free. I mean, not free, but
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I know.
Had to pay the anesthesiologist, and that was it.
Oh, I know. I feel like, and then you get like bills 2 months later.
I know. I'll probably get a bill in February once my insurance has renewed, and they're like, here's your bill for that surgery.
We heard you on a podcast say that it was free.
Yeah.
Tell you that it wasn't.
they're coming for me. Yeah.
So you spoke a little bit about having a supportive partner. How has IVF and everything you've been through sort of affected your relationship?
This is such a good question. I mean, if anything, I definitely think it's strengthened our relationship, strengthened our bond. I feel so much more connected to Dylan. And I think there's just like, we're learning, it's the hardest thing our relationship has ever been put through. We're not married yet. We're engaged now, but it's the hardest thing we've ever had to go through. And so it's showing us our true colors and who we are and how we can show up and support each other. But it's also taken its toll. Like, infertility takes a toll on your intimacy. It takes a toll on, like sometimes being able to connect emotionally or intimately. Sometimes you're just burnout. Like the burnout from infertility and IVF treatments, like seeps into other areas of your life. So it's strengthened us in deep, meaningful ways. And it's also strained our intimacy and connection at times that, I'm like, it shouldn't be like this. We're only 6 years into our relationship, but that's just kind of the reality of it.
Yeah, it's definitely very stressful. And I remember a close friend of ours, like was having relationship troubles while we were going through infertility. And I was like, if you guys are fighting over that before you're even like, what happens if you have real, he was like genuinely coming to me, asking me for advice. And I'm like, I think if you guys are having these problems now, it's like, what happens if you were to go through something like that? It like just puts things into perspective.
Yeah. I feel like Dylan and I could get through anything together now, having been through this. And also the surprising thing was like learning that Dylan processes things in his own way too. Like it's not just about me. It's not just comforting and soothing me. It's like Dylan he's experiencing his own world of emotions also. And so I have to understand that and show up for him too, which I've never been in a relationship like this long or to that, degree. And so that's been a learning curve for me as well. But it's been, I mean, I hate to say like, oh, infertility has been great for our relationship, but it has strengthened us.
That's great. Were you always sort of open with family and friends about your journey, or did you kind of hit a point where you started opening up more?
I've always been an open book in any chapter of my life regarding anything. And so when I found out about the diminished ovarian reserve, I will never forget that day. The way the doctor tells you, or at least for me, my experience felt so like kind of dismissive, like, here's your situation. Here's a pamphlet.
That's exactly what happened to me.
Good luck.
I got a PCOS pamphlet and was sent home like, oh, this is probably what's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't even know what questions to ask.
Yeah. And it's like, I wasn't prepared for that at all. I thought she was going to be like, let's get you started on I don't know what the medications they use for a couple rounds,
like
Clomid or
ovulation
something.
and Clomid, letrozole. Yep.
Yeah. So I thought like we'd go to that step first. And so it just felt like almost like a terminal diagnosis. Like it just, because also my worldview at the time was so small around infertility that I just didn't know anything. I didn't know any better. And so I was like, well, this can't be possible. Like, all I know of IVF is that it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and it's for like women in their 40s. Like that sounds so small-minded now that I know, but like at the time I was like, this can't be true. Mm-hmm. And so when that happened and I had processed it, I was just like, I want to be able to now use my platform to let other women going through this know that it's not a terminal diagnosis. Like it's not, there is community. There are so many people out there who are also experiencing what you're experiencing. I just wanted to like normalize the conversation around infertility because clearly like my perception was so skewed and so far off. I just wanted to help change that for other people.
What was the reaction when you sort of went public with your journey on Instagram?
It was very well received. So many people were like telling me their stories, strangers and people that I know and have worked with and had very intimate friendships with came out of the woodworks being like, yeah, our little, Josie, or I don't know, I'm making that name up, was an IVF baby. And I had no idea, like literally so many women that I worked with back in the office setting told me that they had done IVF and I never knew while we were working together. And so it just occurred to me like how many women do need fertility support and how much more normal it is than I had thought. And so it was just comforting. It was reassuring. I even had like my own cousin, tell me that she had to do IVF and I had no idea. And then that made me kind of sad that also so many women, have kept it private, and I respect everyone's decision, but it's also kind of sad to think that it's something that they had to go through alone. And I wish I could have been there for them when they were going through it.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes when you open up about something, it's always like, oh, no way, me too. And then you're like, wait, I could have opened up about this sooner. Or, why are so many people feeling like they can't talk about this?
Yeah. Exactly.
So what advice would you give someone who's kind of just starting out on this journey?
I think the advice I would give someone is honestly to, like I said earlier, to pace yourself, to have grace with the timeline. I know there's that urge to feel like we mentioned earlier, time is of the essence. I must keep chugging along. I understand that urge, but if I could offer anyone advice, it's just to like slow down and let things have a beat, let things kind of process the way that they're supposed to process. And secondly, it would be to develop or form some sort of care team, whether that's a therapist, a good friend, finding an online community to tap into. But I would recommend at least 3 outlets that you can connect to, because
that's great advice. Yeah.
That's just like helped me feel not so alone. And I do belong to a lot of Facebook groups, and it's just like, you don't even have to engage if you don't want, just read them. I just like read people's posts and it makes you feel not as alone.
Yeah, absolutely. At Rescripted, we have like our own feed on our platform where you can kind of go off of, because some people don't even want to like posts on social media because they don't want anyone to see that they liked infertility accounts. So we kind of took it off of traditional social media, and there's a feed of about like 10,000, maybe 11,000 women now, where you can kind of meet other people who get it and filter by diagnosis and all that fun stuff. Because even if you're not open with, like I've met people in our support groups who are super engaged in the community at Rescripted, but they like haven't even told their mom that they're going through IVF, which is totally fine. Like as long as you have your, support systems in place, whether it's therapy or whatever it is.
Yeah, I know. The Facebook groups or Reddit groups, or I don't know, I'm not on Reddit, but like wherever you can find those pages, I think are just a wealth of knowledge. You can find strength in numbers. You can find comfort in shared experiences. I think it's just critical. Like you're not going through it alone. You shouldn't feel like you're going through it alone.
Absolutely. And the same goes for like all of women's health. Basically, it's like even people that don't struggle with infertility who have endo, it can take up to 7.5 years to get diagnosed with endo. And like they're like, oh, my painful periods are totally normal because the doctor told me once that they're totally normal. And actually, if you don't know what you don't know, basically, is what I always say. Like, you don't know how to advocate for yourself unless you engage in educating yourself or learning more.
Yes, exactly.
So I always like to ask this towards the end of the podcast, but obviously our company's name is Rescripted. So what would you rescript about how people think about infertility or pregnancy loss?
To continue what I was just saying is I would rescript the like stigma around it. And I would just try to shine light on how many women are affected by infertility and normalize it, that it's more women than you think. There's support, there's friends to be had. What's the saying? Everyone says it's like the worst club with the best members.
Yeah. And we've been saying like it takes a village to raise, they say it takes a village to raise a child, but sometimes it takes a village to create one.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No need to suffer in silence. There's a whole community out there, even if you're not comfortable sharing. So, well, thank you, Sarah. This was so awesome getting to know you better and learning about your journey to baby. And I'm so happy for you and your pregnancy and
thank you.
All of the good things.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great stage of it to be in. And I think the number one thing, like I feel so connected to the IVF community and infertility community. And sometimes I feel like there might be this like sense of like detachment or estrangement or even like abandonment when a transfer is successful for someone. And then it's like, oh, well, she's not really in the club anymore. And I just want people to know that I'm still in it with women and I'll be in it on this side for everyone, because once you've experienced it, like that doesn't go away. You're like in the club forever.
Oh, 100%. And I think people don't even realize like, if you want like 2 or 3 kids, like it's always sort of in the back of your mind. And so it's just it's not like this like carefree thing where it's like, oh, I want 3 kids, you know, like, but now I'm like, can I even have 3 kids? So it's like kind of affects your whole family building journey, not just, not to scare you, you're on your first pregnancy, but like, it's like, you're always a part of that club because you have embryos and that are frozen and like, they're there and it's like the door's not closed. Does that make sense?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it'll be, I don't know. We'll see where the road goes and how many we'll have, but I don't know.
Living in the present and you are still part of the club. I assure you. I feel like it never really leaves you and that, for better or worse. And I think as a parent, it is for the better because you really like are grateful for getting to that other side and all that it took to get there, you know?
Exactly. Well, you put it in better words than I did, but thank you.
No, not at all. No, it's all complicated, but all for a good reason. And I'm super excited for you. When are you due?
May 17th.
Awesome.
So little spring baby.
That'll be a great time of year for getting outside.
That's what I keep saying. I'm like, that's like the best time for birthdays because it's like not summer break yet. So everyone's still, you know, like I used to think about those things when I was a kid because my birthday was usually like around right before winter break. And so people would like go away for winter break and could never have birthday parties.
It's nice too, because like when you go through infertility, you like take it where you can get it.
Yeah.
You could never plan. So it's like, oh, this is cool. Like it just worked out that way. Yeah, totally. In the beginning, you're like, I'm going to be due. And then in the end, you're like, I just want a baby. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you for sharing your story and so great meeting you. And
thank you.
Keep in touch and we'll chat soon.
Yes. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you for tuning into this episode of Dear Infertility. We hope it left you feeling more educated and empowered about your reproductive and sexual health. Whatever you're currently struggling with, Rescripted is here to hold your hand every step of the way. If you liked today's episode and want to stay up to date on our podcast, don't forget to click subscribe. And to join Rescripted's free fertility support community, head to rescripted.com.